Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jonathan Ahl. On January 1st, St. Louis resident Andy Magee embarked on an unusual National Park Service adventure with a goal to visit all 418 sites around the country within the course of this year. He's now 5 months into that journey, and he's back in St. Louis this week for a pit stop. He joins me now in the studio for an update on his travels. Andy, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Nice to be here.
So how's it going?
It's going really well. I mean, that's all I can say, really.
How many do you have done so far?
As of today, I am at 189 parks.
And the government shutdown slowed you down a little bit.
It sure did. The government shutdown started before my trip began and lasted for about the first 3 weeks or so of my trip. So I encountered a lot of closed parks and a lot of barricaded entryways and things like that. So that definitely slowed things down for the first month. However, since then, I have been able to go back through and pick up almost all of the parks that I missed the first time around.
So are you on pace to be able to do this by the end of the year?
I am on pace to do it. Barring any unforeseen catastrophic events like another government shutdown, I anticipate being able to do this by the end of the year.
Has some of the extreme weather that we've had this year around the country, has that slowed you down at all or made the experiences different?
It has, yes, both. They're not in a terrible way, but there are a few parks, especially out in California, Nevada, Utah, that are still snowed in, that are not open for the season when they should have opened 2 months ago. And even though I've been through most of that area already, I still need to go back and pick up a couple of loose ends that I wasn't able to see when I was in that area.
I guess the big question that a lot of people will have is why. I mean, it sounds like a lot of fun, but it sounds like a heck of a lot of work. And why are you doing this?
I'm doing it for me. It's kind of a wild hair, just a bit of an adventure, a break from regular life for a year. And I've always been very passionate about the national parks, kind of a hobby in that I spend a lot of my vacation time traveling to parks, camping and hiking and seeing the sights. I like to take a lot of photographs and things like that. So just sort of got a wild hair to do something a little more different, a little more adventurous. And it's a test, it's a test of logistics. It's a test of your sort of self-fortitude and figuring out if you can, be alone for a year on the road and drive all those miles and see all those places. And, in addition to all the parks, I'll also be covering all 50 states, District of Columbia, and 4 U.S. territories.
I was going to ask about that because I was looking at the map, and the national parks in Guam and American Samoa, that's got to be a little bit of a challenge to fit that in a timely manner.
A challenge and expensive, too, because just getting to those places costs a lot of money. But
have you been to either of those yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
The Pacific section of my trip, which will include Guam, American Samoa, and 4 of the Hawaiian Islands, will come in December.
Well, at least your timing is good.
Well,
for the
I
weather.
planned it that way, right? I mean, when it's I started, of course, in the first of the year of my trip, and I started in southern Florida where it was warm, and I stuck to the southern states during the winter. And now that the weather's nicer, I'm moving up in latitudes up the continental U.S. And when I leave St. Louis this week, I'll head back towards the northwest on my way to Alaska, which will be this summer. I'll spend 4 weeks in Alaska hitting all the parks there.
I think there's a perception that a lot of people have when they hear national parks. They think Yosemite, they think Grand Canyon, they think about these huge expanses of land when really many of the parks are relatively small. Sometimes it's a museum or a house or something.
That's right.
So how do you describe the diversity and breadth of what is all called national parks, even though they can be so very different?
The National Park Service administers, right now, it's 419 sites. We had added a new one since I started my trip. 419 sites, and they cover, in shorthand terms, it's basically the history of the United States. And that also includes, our sort of great landscape parks like Grand Canyon and Yosemite and Yellowstone and places like that. which are really not that many. There's 61, the sort of the big national parks. And then everything else is smaller. We have national monuments, we have national memorials, a lot of national historical parks. That would include a lot of the sort of Civil War battlefields and military parks, a lot of presidential history, things like that. Along the East Coast, and in Florida, South Carolina, there's a lot of old fortification sites that go back to Spanish-American War and all those type of things. So being able to stop at all of these different places gives you an incredibly informed sense of this country as a whole. And I found it to be like the greatest history lesson you could possibly imagine. Every day I'm out at the parks is like a college course in history, in geology, in botany, in wildlife studies. I mean, everything that you can imagine. Every day you're just absorbing all this incredible information, all this incredible diversity about our country, both in place and also in history and time, the people that were important. And it's tremendous to be able to have that opportunity to kind of capture all that in one big moment.
Are you coming to some kind of understanding of a greater truth about America? I'm asking the big question here. Are you coming to some kind of sense of a greater truth or understanding of who we are as a country, as a people, as a society by visiting these national parks?
Well, you'll have to ask me again when I'm done. But
well, can I get the status?
But yes. I mean, the answer is yes. I mean, I sort of equate it to it's like a 419 piece jigsaw puzzle, and every park stop is another piece in the puzzle, and the greater image becomes more and more revealed with every stop, and yes, you start to get this incredible sense of the country as a whole. It's a little difficult to put into precise words right now, and I'm sure after I'm done and I have a little time to distill the whole experience, I'll be able to do that. But because I'm kind of in the middle of it right now, I vacillate between this sort of pragmatic, let's execute the trip, what's the next step kind of mentality, and sort of also keeping that 30,000 foot view.
How do you, what counts as having visited a park? What do you have to do to say, I've been here and I've done that?
For me, for this particular trip, the two parameters I set for myself were, to actually be able to get access to the park. And that might be a short visit. It might be a couple of days or more. And B, to get my national park passport stamp. Which is a way of solidifying or proving that you were there on that date and that you did see the park. So those are the two things that I do at each place.
For people who live in the St. Louis area, probably the two closest national parks would be the Gateway Arch and the Ulysses S. Grant House.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Are those good starter things to try to get your feet wet in visiting national parks?
Absolutely. Of course they are, and both of those places they're very, very different, but they are also kindred in a way because they're very sort of region specific and local to St. Louis. So you learn a little bit about St. Louis, but you also learn about the bigger country as a whole, visiting both of those sites in different ways. Visiting the Grant site, I visited Grant's site earlier this year. In a like a 2-week period where I managed to hit several sort of historic American sites, different Americans, and my takeaway from that was that those particular people were so valuable to the history of this country and so important in shaping the direction of the country that if you removed any one of those people from our national lineage, that you wouldn't recognize the country today. And I think that's interesting. But yeah, we're blessed to have 2 parks right here in the city, but every state including the District of Columbia, has at least one National Park Unit site. And looking at the map, you can see they're spread all over the country. And I would estimate that nobody in the country is more than a 4-hour drive away from their nearest park.
I haven't been to the Grant site yet, but I did notice, looking at their website, they speak with a fair amount of candor about some of the less flattering parts of American history that are reflected in that house and in that park. I'm wondering what your experience has been like in a greater perspective, considering we seem to have this battle between trying to acknowledge American exceptionalism, but also be realistic with the parts of our history that are not something that we're necessarily proud of.
You're absolutely right, and that is something that I've noticed, and mostly in some of the newer parks. It seems like there is a current trend to be as real and frank and honest about the history of those places, or whatever is being honored in those places, and I find that very refreshing. So, especially in some of the newer civil rights parks that talk about a very difficult history. Some of the Japanese internment camp parks, like Manzanar National Historic Site in California. Those places are sort of painful enough on their own, but then to have a sort of very vivid recollection of that history in an honest way. One of the toughest places I've been to was the Sand Creek Massacre National Memorial, which is in Colorado. And it's a fairly new park, and it barely has anything established there. But it was such a brutal and disturbing episode in our history. And the exhibits at the park are extraordinarily candid and frank in a way that I think is very beneficial to people who want to come and understand what happened there.
Here's the unfair question. Do you have a favorite park or a favorite place so far that you visited, something that really stands out to you?
I had before this trip, I've been to lots of the sites before, especially a lot of the bigger parks, so I sort of had my own favorites. But one of the ones that I visited on this trip for the first time was Death Valley National Park, which I'd been wanting to go to for years but never made it out there. And I had such a wonderful experience there. I camped there for 3 nights, and it was in the winter, so it was a little chilly, not hot. But it was, I was just blown away by the scale, the beauty, the sort of, the beauty in desolation, you know. It's an incredible place, and being able to get out and explore as much of that park as I could in 3 days was a real blessing. And I'm actually really itching to go back there.
What about the people that you meet when you're on these? Is it, I mean, fellow travelers, people who work at these? What kind of people have you met on your travels?
All kinds. I mean, everything you can imagine. Everything from tourists from Asia, Japan to and Europe to families who are on a family vacation. I like to talk to park rangers when I can and learn their stories and what drives them. I run into, especially at some of the smaller, lesser-known parks, I run into a lot of people who I would call like, park fanatics, kind of like me, that are sort of on a mission to visit as many places as they can, or have a few real favorites that they like to come back to over and over and things like that. So there's all kinds of people. In my experience with national parks, I wish I'd known about the Junior Ranger program earlier. A thing that they have at just about every national park, activities for kids, and they get a little Junior Ranger thing. Yep. Do you find a lot of people collect and explore that? I see a lot of kids doing the Junior Ranger program, and it's so heartwarming. Because they're so into it, they're so enthusiastic, and every now and then, when I'm at a visitor center, you might catch a Junior Ranger swearing in ceremony where they raise their hand and some park ranger is giving them the oath. And I got to tell you, I get choked up every time because it gives me so much pride and optimism for the future. I mean, these are young people who are going to grow up understanding the value of our national park system, and they're going to grow up to appreciate it and take care of it and be the stewards that we all need to be in the future going forward.
Since you're only partway through, can you give us a commitment you'll come back and tell us about the project when you're done?
I'd love to. Absolutely love to.
Thanks very much to Andy Magee, local artist and owner of
Chochi's
Picture Mart
That's right.
in Kirkwood. Thank you. Thanks for joining us today, Andy. Great to talk with you. Best of luck on the rest of your travels.
Thank you so much. Great to talk to you too.
This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.